he's been expelled from the Labour Party. He stood up for us, and therefore we have to stand up for him. George Galloway.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. President, distinguished elders, the Mosque Committee of the Islamic Societies here in Sheffield, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, wassalamu alaikum, peace be with you. This is a fantastic meeting, and I congratulate you all. I hope it doesn't spoil the attendance for the big meeting tonight. I hope you'll come to that, because we will have more time to expand on the many issues we need to deal with here. But in the time available to me, I would make the strongest possible plea that we found this year, in 2004, a rebirth of respect in British politics, which has been corrupted by lies, by deceit, by forgery, by conspiracy, by war and occupation. And our country is being poisoned here at home as a result. I'm so very proud to be sharing a platform with a representative of the Hurriyat in occupied Kashmir. Our dear brother asks if I'm still marching for Kashmir. I tell you, my life will not be complete until I can walk with you in freedom in Srinagar. Our dear departed brother, Dr. Ayub Thakur, took to Chicago on 4/11/2001 to address 25,000 people in the Rosemont Convention Center in Chicago on the subject of Kashmir. I was always frightened after 9/11 that somehow they'd try to hang it on me. After all, they try to hang everything else on me. But I was the organizer of the national lobby on Kashmir, and we moved mountains in this country on this subject. This is not the time or place to go into how our legs were cut from underneath us, but some of you know the way in which that was done. But we brought 7,000 people to lobby the House of Commons in July. Baking hot day. As far as the eye could see were members of the Pakistani and Kashmiri communities and their allies in Britain queuing to call their members of parliament to account. And I developed in that campaign the concept, remains true today, that there are more than 60 members of the House of Commons sitting there in nice jobs, believe me. I've been doing it for nearly 20 years. Sitting there on majorities which are smaller than the number of Muslim voters in their constituency. This is a potential source of enormous power, which can in most parliaments change power in the government. If 60 members of parliament of one side are replaced by 60 members of parliament of another, the change is 120, which gives the Muslim voters in this country enormous potential power, a power which has not been used, and which we tried to galvanize. And funnily enough, and there are people in this room, we also took a train to the European Parliament in Brussels, because we knew even then, almost a decade ago, that the European Parliament would become an increasingly important battleground, particularly on international issues. And now I come before you as a candidate for that European Parliament to use it in the way that I've used the House of Commons over almost 20 years, as a platform from which to fight for what is good and against what is bad and what is evil. I'm standing in London. I'm number 1 on the London list of candidates, as Anas is number 1 on the list of candidates in Yorkshire and the Humber. Both of us have a real chance of being elected, but we're depending on you. I make no bones about it. I really need your support in this. Tony Blair thought, when he expelled me from the Labour Party, that he had finished me, that he had closed my mouth. But I'm still standing. I'm still fighting. I'm still speaking every day, today 3 times in one day, in one part of the country or another. And I really need your help. Because, let me tell you, the one result Tony Blair does not want to read about the day after the elections on June the 10th is that I have been elected to the European Parliament in London. Let me tell you that. We have emerged, as my comrade Maxine just said, out of the anti-war movement, the great movement, the greatest movement that this country has ever seen. 10 times bigger than previous demonstrations seen in this country. And not just the numbers, but the scope, the spectrum of the people was one of the most beautiful things any of us who were there will ever see in our lives. Black and white, men and women, young and old, Muslim, non-Muslim, the flags flying, the banners flying, demanding no war on Iraq, freedom for Palestine. In the land of Balfour, where the Palestinian tragedy was authored, in the building in which I work, the British Parliament, which is the scene of many crimes, not least the crime in Kashmir, roaring with full throat freedom for Palestine, victory to the Intifada, no war on Iraq. But you see, the point is, we failed to stop the war. We came up against the brick wall of our almost total lack of representation in the political arena. We had millions outside, but we had only dozens inside, and most of them melted away when the first shot was fired in the attack upon Iraq. And Mr. Blair and Mr. Bush repeatedly assert that they're not at war with Islam. They have nothing against Muslims. But you see, the Americans have a saying: if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, the chances are that it is a duck. And all the bombs are falling on Muslims, and all the people dropping the bombs are in the imperialist camp, the real axis of evil, which begins in Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C., runs through Downing Street in London, and finishes in the cabinet room of General Ariel Sharon in occupied Jerusalem. That's the real axis of evil. And incidentally, while we're on about Mr. Vajpayee, one of the most extraordinary developments of recent years is the new special relationship that we have in the world. The new special relationship between the Hindu fanaticist fascist BJP and General Sharon's Zionist Israel. It's no accident that the Mossad are actually now in Srinagar, where I can't go. 3 times they've refused me permission to visit the occupied territory of Kashmir, but the Mossad are operating there helping to train the 600,000 occupation army in the bloody methods of suppression of a justified people's revolt for their rights. But of course it isn't just abroad. The other side of the coin of war against Muslims abroad is the war against Muslims here in Britain. And I cannot forswear here in Sheffield to say that the Member of Parliament for Sheffield Brightside, the Secretary of State for Home Affairs, is a bigot, is a racist, and is feeding the worst element in British society today. And it gives me no pleasure to say that. I never imagined that that was so. But I tell a story that happened to me just a few days ago in Leytonstone in East London. I met a young man with 2 young children, a young Muslim professional man. He stopped me in the street. He said, "I want to ask you a question." It was a question like no question I have ever been asked, and left me speechless. He said, "You know, in the 1920s and 30s, the Jewish community in Germany was an integral part of the German economy. They had been there for hundreds of years. Many of them were very wealthy people. And yet look what happened to them," he said. And then he asked, "Do you think anything like that could ever happen to us here?" It chilled my blood that a young family man in Britain in 2004 is walking around the streets of London wondering if some murderous pogrom might be launched against him, his family, and his community. And let me say, I believe there is almost no chance at all that such a thing could happen in Britain to Muslims today, not least because of the great movement that we have built together. But that people are afraid of such a thing speaks volumes. And everywhere I go, I meet Muslims filled with anxiety and even fear, yes. Afraid of the press, afraid of the police, afraid of the BNP, and afraid of David Blunkett. And all of these things are linked. All of them feed each other in a vicious circle. The Daily Express, the Sun, and the other gutter snipe papers pumping out daily evil prejudice against 2.5 million people in our own country, because it's part of the job of persuading the majority in our own country that they must make war against Muslims abroad. With their stories about immigrants and asylum seekers and dodgers. Somebody said to me the other day, I couldn't believe my ears. Don't know where they got it. 90% of Pakistanis, they said, don't pay income tax. I don't know where they got that absurd lie, but I know that the mentality which produced it was fed by the daily diet of propaganda and racist, Islamophobic lies in the British media. And of course, the police force are not a separate world from us. Our country and its police force mirror each other. And we have many very good policemen. As someone is getting virtually a death threat a day, I'm very grateful to the good policemen for their protection of me. We have a very significant number of bad policemen. And we know that because we captured them on film in the BBC undercover programme, where a young Scottish journalist went undercover with a camera and a microphone, and he recorded the evil that was being spoken by men in police uniforms. And not one rotten apple in the barrel, but 30% of the people on the course. People on camera boasting about how they'd love to stab a Paki. A police officer in uniform with a Ku Klux Klan hat on his head, saying that Stephen Lawrence, the black teenager, knifed to death in a London street, had deserved to die, that his parents should not have been given the MBE, that should have been given to the fascist thugs who killed him. A police officer boasting about how he stopped a Pakistani driver, booked him for traffic and registration offences, and told him he must leave his car, and laughed into the camera about how he made the man and his wife and children walk 2.5 miles back to their holiday camp. And what did David Blunkett do when he heard about this program? He laid into not the policeman in the Ku Klux Klan hat, but into the BBC for bringing us the program in the first place. He charged the undercover reporter with damaging his police uniform by secreting a secret camera underneath it, and forced him to pay for the damage to the uniform, and forced him to repay the 6 months' salary that he'd received whilst working as a policeman and a journalist undercover. That's New Labour's Britain. That's how they've repaid the loyalty of the vast majority of Muslim voters in this country. Just up the road from here, in Rotherham, is an MP called Dennis McShane. Well, as a matter of fact, he's not called Dennis McShane. That's not his real name. He has a Polish name. His family were Polish Catholic refugees to Britain. He changed his name. He changed his image into a proper Pukka Englishman, which is that's exactly his problem with you. Because he passes the cricket test, you see. Nobody'd ever know if I hadn't told you that he's really Polish. And he doesn't want Muslims in Britain to look, act, or think like Muslims. Yes, they can keep their religion in a drawer, take it out for weddings and funerals, but they should apply their minds to metamorphosing themselves in the way that he and his family did. And that's why when the horrific bomb explosion in Istanbul took place, this man depending on Muslim voters in Rotherham, went into the British Foreign Office, which used to rule 1/3 of the globe, and which is dripping with the blood of empire, and wrote a press release which said that British Muslims had to make up their mind whether they were with us or against us, whether they were to follow what he called laughably the British way of peaceful dialogue and non-violence, or whether they were to pursue the path of terrorism. Now, by the way, this is a member of a government which had just ignored the pleas of 2 million of their own citizens to try peaceful dialogue and non-violence as a solution to the problem in Iraq. And this is a man sitting in a foreign office which once presided over an empire by force so vast that upon it the sun never set. Although, as my old grandfather used to say, that's because God would never trust the British in the dark. But he didn't see the irony in demanding a loyalty oath from you. When he works for you, not you working for him. He's only there because of you. You owe nothing to him. He owes everything to you. And this is true in the case of tens and tens of members of Parliament who, despite depending on Muslim voters, have been a part of this atmosphere of witch hunt at home and abroad. I was in Leicester the other day. Do you remember that huge brouhaha about the Leicester City footballers and the alleged offences in which they were charged? I have no idea whether they were guilty of these offences or not. If I was forced to guess, I'd probably guess that they were not. But Spain is a civilized country. These men were on official charges. They had lawyers. They were in a clean prison with doctors. Their wives were visiting them every day in a media circus. But the whole of British society was turned upside down by the incarceration of those 4 footballers. Members of Parliament were raising questions in the House. The Foreign Office was demanding their release. The tabloids were painting the prison in Spain, in Alicante, almost like the black hole of Calcutta. While 9 British citizens lay rotting in the tropics in cages, chained and manacled in Guantanamo Bay for 2 whole years without Tony Blair lifting a finger to help them. And what's the principal difference between the 9 British citizens in Guantanamo Bay and the 4 British citizens from Leicester City Football Club is that the 9 in Guantanamo Bay were British Muslims and the 4 in Leicester were not. We have our own Guantanamo Bay. In Belmarsh Prison, there are people entombed in dungeons without charge, without trial, without any proper legal representation at all. In fact, when a hard-faced, hard-hearted tribunal freed a prisoner this week, a Libyan, because a panel of doctors said that he was mentally ill as a result of his incarceration, Blunkett launched a savage attack on this panel of doctors and professionals, apparently oblivious to the fact that these men are being held there absolutely illegally in terms of international law. We have actually taken ourselves out of the European Convention on Human Rights, the only country in Europe so to do, so that we can keep these men without charge, without trial, potentially forever, without ever bringing them before a court. Every week, it seems, a new dragnet, a new sweep, nets, 2 Muslims here, 5 Muslims there, 10 Muslims there, and in a blaze of publicity they're carted off on some terrorist charge or other. Except most of them are never charged. More than 7, in fact 710 people have been arrested under David Blunkett's Terrorism Act in 2 years. But not 1 in 10 of those arrested have been charged and brought to trial. And not 1 in 10 of those has been convicted. In fact, only 2 people have been convicted. And neither of those was convicted of a terrorist offence. Now, the damage, of course, was done with the arrests. Everybody read about the arrests, was told more or less in the media that those arrested were dangerous terrorists and that they were Muslims and that were in our midst. The damage was done in the psyche of the majority population, but it was also done in the psyche of the Muslim population themselves, who begin to think of themselves like that man in Leytonstone, as beleaguered, besieged, endangered, in need of protection. Now, we just can't go on like this. We're destroying systematically all of the reasons why Britain was once a good country to live in. We're destroying all these reasons. In the name of liberty, we are destroying liberty. In the name of freedom, we are disfiguring the face of freedom in our country. We're making war abroad, but we're also making war at home. And it risks tearing the whole social fabric of our society. So we say it's time to stand up and be counted. Because if we don't stand up now and be counted, the day might come where it won't be so easy for us to stand up and be counted. Perhaps the liberties that are fast disappearing will disappear faster still. And then we may wake up one day when the political space that we have to make a stand is much less than it is today. Now, this is an easy election to use for this purpose. Michael Howard isn't going to end up as Prime Minister if you give Tony Blair a bloody nose on the 10th of June. These are elections to the European Parliament. Secondly, there's no danger by supporting us that you're going to let somebody else in that you don't want, because this is a proportional representation election. You're not voting against anybody else, you're voting for somebody. And there are 6 candidates, 6 seats. If you get a sixth of the vote, you get a member of the European Parliament. Now, I want to say this, though it's embarrassing for him, and he's my friend. But this candidate, who's number 1 on our list, and by the way, so is the number 2 on our list, also a Muslim. And in every seat in the land, we're running a Muslim candidate as either number 1 or number 2. That's the commitment we're showing. This man is solid platinum. This man is the most outstanding spokesman the Muslim community in Britain, indeed Europe, could have. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if he was in the European Parliament now, when the French government came along to tear the hijab off the heads of little Muslim girls in France? He would have been on every platform, every television station, all over Europe, with that wonderful eloquence, making the arguments about freedom and liberty and defending the community from which he springs. And it would be nothing less than a tragedy if we fail to get him elected to the European Parliament. Now, do you know where this constituency covers? It covers Leeds, it covers Bradford, it covers Sheffield and Wakefield and Dewsbury and Halifax. Do you get the picture? Yeah. There are hundreds of thousands of Muslim voters in that constituency. They have the chance to elect Britain's leading Muslim as a spokesman to the European Parliament. It would be madness to pass it up, because who's going to get it if he doesn't? Any of you know who your MEPs are? I'll give £20 to any person in this room that can name 2 members of the European Parliament from this constituency. I bet you can't. I've made that bet all over the country. Nobody's taken it up yet. There's a man at the back, yes. Because they're faceless, nameless stooges. They're not even legends in their own households. They do nothing, nothing, nothing. You don't hear their names even, from 5 years to the next, let alone do they strike a blow for you in Europe or on the international stage. So I finished where I started, only to start again at 7 o'clock. I've got much more to say about Iraq and Palestine and so on, because we'll be talking there to a wider audience. I've concentrated on this argument to the Muslim community in this meeting here today. I finish where I started. I really need you. We really need you. I hope you can help us raise the money that we need to fight this election. And I mean serious money, not